Greetings and welcome to yarnspirations.com. I'm Mary Beth Temple, and in this video we're going to learn all there is to know about slip stitch knitting so we can make the Let It Slip Knit blanket. To make this blanket you're going to need Bernat Blanket in two contrasting colors. We used olive green and vintage white, a size US 15 or 10 millimeter circular knitting needle 36 inches in cable length, that's 91.5 centimeters or longer, or size needed to obtain gauge. Now we're going to work back and forth in rows, but we need that long needle to accommodate the thickness of this squishy, luscious blanket. There are a lot of tips I can give you on how to make slip stitch knitting easier, so let's get started and take a look at the pattern. The first thing I want to talk about is some general tips and tricks about slip stitch knitting in general. I have taught this class a million times. There are a couple of things that tend to break people's brains, so let's just go over it now before we get started so you'll know what you're looking at. Once again, we have the text written out for you and we have the chart written out for you. This is one of those instances though where the chart can be a little confusing if you are not a confident slip stitch knitter. Overall, one of the things that happens with slip stitch knitting is you have rows that look like they have two colors in them, and they do, but you are only ever manipulating one color at a time. So even when you're looking here at these rows that have two colors in them, you are not changing colors during the row. You are only changing colors at the beginning of the row. And you will always, in this pattern, not always and forever, but always in this pattern, be working in multiples of two. You're never going to have 3 rows in a color or 5 rows in a color. It is always going to be an even number. And that one of those reasons is because the yarn is on the side. When you have to drop one color, you can pick up the next color. So even though you're seeing these, and this is what slip stitch knitting does, is it gives you that 2-color row. If the row is predominantly green, you have the green in your hand. If the row is predominantly vintage white, you have the vintage white in your hand. Don't let the color chart mess with your brain. The other thing I want to talk about is where that yarn goes. We have instances in which you will see WYIB, which is with yarn in back, and WYIF, which is with yarn in front. You could drive yourself crazy trying to figure out where the yarn goes, except on this particular slip stitch pattern, and for many of them, but not all of them. But on this particular slip stitch pattern, you are always slipping the yarn on the wrong side of the work. So once you have a couple of rows done, you know if it's in back or in front because it's always going to be on the same side of the work. So if you look at this legend, you can make yourself a little bananas. But basically, if it's green, knit with green. If it's white, knit with white. If it slips, keep that float on the wrong side of the work. And then once you have the hang of that, all this is going to be so much easier. So I have 2 repeats on my swatch. The blanket begins and ends with 5 stitches of garter stitch. So I'm just grabbing up my second color of yarn. If you follow along in the text, you will see that you will make a big garter stitch border. I just put a couple of rows on so I'd have something to work on, but your garter stitch border will be much larger. So on the first row, goodness, I am tangled today. On the first row, we're going to knit 5, and that is not on the chart. So that knit 5 is not on the chart. And I'm leaving my other color hanging because I'm going to need it later, and I'm just going to leave a 6 to 8 inch fold, 20-30 centimeters. I will weave that in later. So I'm going to knit 5 that is not on the chart. 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm only going to do that at the beginning and the end of the row. Now, looking at the text, we have knit 6, slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back, knit 5, and that's the repeat. You'll just do that repeat over and over again. If we're following along in the chart, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there's my knit 6, slip, there's my big V, so that's slip with yarn in back, knit 5. And we are slipping everything purlwise in this particular pattern. You don't have to guess which is knitwise, which is purlwise. For this pattern, they are all purlwise. So we're going to knit 6. Slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back. So leaving my yarn in the back, I'm going to slip 1 from the left needle to the right needle as if to purl, making sure it doesn't twist. Oops, sorry. And then I'm going to knit 5. So that yarn is going to go behind the slipped stitch. Once again, this is a gauge issue that you will get the hang of as you do a lot of this knitting. You don't want to pull it so tight that the work squishes up and is not able to lay flat or look nice, but you also don't want it so loose that you're going to catch a finger in it later or have the stitch come out. So once again, your first couple rows, you're sort of learning how to work in this technique. The good thing with blanket, it's such a thick, fluffy yarn, it's pretty forgiving. So there's our knit 5. So we're going to do that again. Knit 6, slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back, knit 5. Again, let's take a look at it on the chart. There's my knit 6, slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back, knit 5. Now, we talked about this earlier. Why is that stitch green? Since I didn't knit it and I slipped it, it's the color of the row below. So there's my green, but I only ever had the white yarn in my hand. I know I'm harping on this, but if you get that in your brain, it's going to make this and every other slip stitch project you attempt that much easier. 2, slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back. So as if to purl. Put the right needle tip in the stitch like you're going to purl it, but just move it from the left hand needle to the right hand needle and not do anything. And then knit 5. And because, like I said, I have 2 repeats, you'll have many at the very end of your row. You're going to have 5 stitches left that are not included on the chart. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just knit those. Okay, so there is my first row of the slip stitch pattern. And what's going to happen on your swatch, which is much bigger, for every repeat that you did, I think there's 9 repeats in this pattern. The way it's cast on, you'll have that one green hanging out because every time you slip it, it's the color of the row before. So let's take, okay, taking a look at this second row, I'm staying in the white because A, it didn't tell me to change colors, so I know I don't have to. But also B, I know that I'm always working my rows in multiples of 2 in the same color. Moving forward, I'll know that it's not time to change colors because the other color won't be there waiting for me. So that knit 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is not on the chart, but it is in the text. That is my garter stitch border. The next thing I'm going to do is knit 6. Pardon me, that was knit 5. Knit 5, slip 1 purlwise, knit 6. So that was knit 5. And how did I know that it was knit 5 and knit 6 even though I said knit 6 the first time? Because it's green. I know that I'm not going to knit that. So now I'm going to slip it purlwise with yarn in front. So I'm going to bring that yarn to the front of the work. I'm not going to make a yarn over. I just want it to come over between the 2 needles. I'm going to slip it purlwise with yarn in front and then knit 6. Once again, I'm going to get that yarn to the back so I can knit. Here's my floats. same as the row before, but I don't want to pull it too tight, nor do I want to make it too loose. Six, so that's the end of my repeat. Moving on to the second repeat, let's take a look at the chart. I'm reading in this direction because my right hand rows I read right side rows I read right to left, my wrong side rows I read left to right. So that was where I got messed up before. I said the wrong words, but I could look at my knitting and tell that what I was supposed to be doing. So I'm going to knit 5, slip 1 with yarn in front, knit 6. I have to get the yarn in the front, so I'm bringing it between the two needles. I'm not doing a yarn over, just bringing it between, slipping it purlwise, left needle tip to right needle tip without doing anything to it. Get that yarn back in the back so I can knit. Don't pull it too tight, don't make it too loose. Six, and because this is the end of my row, I have my 5 at the end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm just going to knit those. Remember, they are in the text, they are not showing up in the chart. 5. Again, this guy's a little loosey-goosey, but that's because that's the cut end. I'll weave that in later and tighten him up. So let's go to the third row. So once again, this is the front of the work. Everything looks like garter stitch, and for every repeat, I'm going to have that green stitch that has been slipped and is pulled up from the bottom. Now, looking at my next stitch, I see a lot of green going on here, so I'm going to know that I'm going to work now in green, not in the white. And if I looked on the pattern, I would see the same thing. It says pick up A at the end of the second row, and third row is reminding me with A, knit 5. So I've changed back to the green color. Once again, in the interest of not having 1275 ends, I'm just going to float my unused color up the side. Not too tight, not too loose. I'm just going to bring it up the side. I do not want to cut the yarn every time I change color, or I will be weaving in ends until I die of old age. Five, so that's my 5 that are on my border that are not on the chart. So there's my 5. Now I'm going to knit 7, slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back, knit 4. So let's see how that looks. Knit 7, see, there's my 2-color row. That green came all the way up and covered the white, but I only ever knit with the white. Slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back. My yarn is already in the back. Slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back. And then knit 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that is the end of that repeat. Let's take a look at the second repeat. Let's take a look at it on the chart. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm going to knit 7, slip 1 with yarn in back because I know I want my yarn on the wrong side of the work, and this is a right side row, knit 4. slip one purlwise with yarn in back. My yarn's already in the back, so I didn't have to do anything. 2, 3, 4. I should have 5 left for my border. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, when I was doing the wrong side row, I said I knew which ones I had to slip because it was the opposite color of the one I was working in, right? And so we're going to slip it. If we slipped it on the front, we're slipping it on the back. And one of the reasons I know that is looking at this chart. Every one of those V's goes over 2 rows. So if I slip it going this way, I have to slip it going the other way. Now, why did I not worry about knitting on that green one when I had to ignore it the first time? Because it was a new color. Every 2 rows when I'm changing my colors, then I'm going to follow that chart slavishly, and then on the way back, I'm going to go ahead and know that I have to slip it. If I slipped it on the front, I'm slipping it on the back. So I'm going to go ahead and make a couple more rows. I just want to show you a little bit of row 7 and 8 because on those rows we are slipping more than 1 stitch at a time. So I want you to see how that looks. But I'm going to go ahead and keep doing what I'm doing, following that pattern very, very carefully to make sure that my stitches are lining up. After I've done a couple of repeats, it's a lot more intuitive, but until I have to pay very careful attention to make sure that my pattern is set up the way I want it to be. So I'm going to do a few more rows and I'm going to catch you back here on row 7. All right, taking a look at the 7th row, it says with a knit 5 and then knit 1, slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back, knit 1, and then it says, this is the part I want you to look at, it says slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back 3 times. Note that it does not say slip 3 purlwise with yarn in back, and the reason is we want you to move those stitches from the left hand needle tip to the right hand needle tip 1 at a time so that you don't stretch them out of shape. So we're going to knit 5 because it's the beginning of the row. You bring that new color up. So that's my first 5 that are not on the chart. Then it's knit 1, slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back, knit 1. Just remember this is a right side row, so the colors don't mean as much to me. I'm doing what I'm told. Knit 1, slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back, knit 1. Then slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back 3 times. So remember, I do not want you to stab your needle in there and go through all 3. It pulls the tension all to heck. So 1, 2, 3, knit 1. Now this is where I have to be really careful bringing my yarn across the back of the work. Can't be too tight, can't be crazy loose. But this is something you really want to pay attention to because it is very easy to mess up the width of your fabric if you're not paying enough attention here. All right, there's my float. There's my knit 1. Now slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back, knit 1. Slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back, knit 1. Slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back 3 times. 1, 2, 3. So that is my first repeat of the 7th row, and you can see my little geometrics are starting to build up. Let's take a look at that on the chart on the 7th row. So knit 1. Once again, I'm beginning this new repeat, but I have to bring that yarn way over. Not too tight, not too loose. Knit 1. Slip 1 with yarn in back, knit 1. Slip 1 with yarn in back, knit 1. Slip 3, 1, 2, 3, purlwise with yarn in back, 1, 2, 3, knit 1, keeping an eye on that float, slip 1 with yarn in back, knit 1, and then slip 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to have 5 left at the end because this is the end of my row. Once again, being very careful to manage that float. Oop, can't even find my working yarn. Everything's so fluffy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then heading back on row 8. If I knit it, I'm knitting it. If I slipped it, I slipped it. And again, while that sounds like a simplification, it really is how it works on this type of knitting on the wrong side rows. So knit the knits, slip the slips, don't make yourself crazy reading the pattern. Right, and we're going to begin and end with our knit 5. This time, of course, I have to keep my yarn in front because this is a wrong side row. And we'll take a look at the floats when we get there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How can I tell that these are my 3 slips without looking at the pattern? Because they do not match the yarn that's in my hand, right? So I'm going to bring that yarn so I can slip with yarn in front. And I'm going to slip 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to knit the next stitch. Now let's just take a look. See, and there's my floats, laying flat against the work, not crazy pulled out, and not so tight that the work squooshes up. And I'm going to go ahead and do that all the way across. If I slipped it before, I'm slipping it now. If I knit it before, I'm knitting it now, and I'm going to keep the I'm going to keep the float on the wrong side of the work, which is the side facing me. That's yarn in front because that's where all the floats are. One, 2, 3. Once you get the hang of reading your work like this, you can really cruise back on the wrong side rows because it does not, at that point, require a whole lot of brain cells. You know which side of the work the float belongs on. And it's really a matter of if you knit it before, knit it now. If you slipped it before, slip it now. And you'll know whether you need to knit it or slip it, because if you need to knit it, it will match the working yarn color that is in your hand. If it does not match the color of the working yarn that is in your hand, it was a slip stitch. And then we're going to knit off those last 5 stitches because that's the border. All right, so this is the right side of the work. Like I said, our geometric shapes are starting to build and you see no floats. This is the wrong side of the work. And all the floats are back here, whether they're floating over 3 or over 1, all the floats are on the wrong side of the work. This is a really cool pattern to learn the technique of slip stitch knitting, and a lot of this, like I said, is general slip stitch knitting tricks. Once you get the hang of it, you can go crazy and make this beautiful blanket as well as many other projects. This is a great skill to have in your tool bag. So I'm Mary Beth Temple. Thank you for joining me for the Let It Slip knit blanket tutorial here on yarnspirations.com. We look forward to seeing you again real soon.